Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey peeps, how's your 2025 rocking?
It's still January, on the 30th week of January.
January, that will never end.
I'm tired of dirty snow. That's where I'm at right now.
Dirty snow.
It's weird how like January takes forever, but then all of a sudden we'll be like, so it's September, and
yes.
like how
time to get those fall crops on the ground.
That's it. I always say it's just January. I've got a little time to get my seeding, trays in for like, especially cool season crops. I always miss that window. I always miss if I'm going to grow a few transplants.
February 1st is go time, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. I'm trying out a new thing this year. I'm trying out a bonsai, but this would work for gardens too. A bonsai reminder setup in my phone, like a pre-scheduled reminders for the whole season that I'm having repeat every year. First Sunday in January every year, or for whatever. I'm going to see how it works. We don't know because there's different times of the year where you do different interventions as far as pruning or repotting or any of that kind of fun stuff. So I have mine that most of them are just around the bend as far as starting some new seeds and thinking about repotting. So it's an exciting time.
Reminders are a good thing. That's a very good thing.
Reorganized the greenhouse bench for like things that really didn't need bottom heat, but they were already on the like heat mats or whatever, because seed starting for me starts next week, the first week of February.
Right.
So for those cool season things. So I'm like, okay, I need to actually like, how many bales of soil do I have? And
we strategically placed our like giant order of vegetable seeds, but had it placed early, and it was like, please don't ship it until the last week of January, so nobody like jumps the gun to like want to start things early. But then at the same time we were like, man, we really got to start those hot peppers earlier, because those scorpions, ghost, all of those guys, those Carolina Reapers, take forever.
They take a longer time to germinate.
So they are the first thing
I've always had really long experiences of very long, not only germination, but then even growth.
Yes.
It just takes you feel like they've been in the greenhouse for like a year by the time you've put out, you're like putting everything else out. And I
don't ever grow Lysianthus then, both of you. It will haunt your dreams. It takes so long. It's like 6 to 8 weeks just to germinate.
What?
Oh gosh.
Just to germinate.
That would drive me crazy, because I'd want to keep coming and check in and be like, are you doing anything?
So like if I wanted to put them in say like the first week of April, because like I've seeded them before, and if I wanted to put them in say the first week of April, I would have had to start them in December for them to be like barely big enough to go in the ground. Like not beautiful plants, like just big enough to go in the ground.
Yeah, we'll never do that. Sorry.
So shout out to Lizzie growers.
I'll just take the hot peppers. At least they'll like germinate and pop up, but then they just take forever after that.
They're alive.
They're alive at least.
Yeah. They're not just like a film of green growing on the soil.
When plants are little in their seeds, it always freaks me out to like manage the water, because I feel like I'm like, I want to water you, but I don't want you to be too wet. But what if?
Ooh, you know what? You probably already do this, but much. Vermiculite just sprinkled over the top is so great for really small seeds, because it keeps that moisture like right there at the surface level, and you don't overdo it. So that's been really helpful for me with like snapdragon seeds that are just like dust. Vermiculite sprinkled like a fine.
Great in salads as well.
Confused with vermiculite, so don't get those two things confused, or put in salad. Yeah.
Okay. Don't eat that.
Don't eat it. No, it is a naturally occurring substance. It is OMRI approved.
Perlite will not have the same effect if you do that over the top of your seeds. No. So the two are
indeed different
in color, but do not get them confused. They do different things.
How did you all make it through the cold? Any impact?
Here in Kentucky, it has been, we had snow, just for those of you that may not be here in Kentucky. In central Kentucky, I know most of Kentucky's had a lot of snow, but the snow has stuck around for weeks now.
More snow and more staying power than we're used to.
Cold weather.
Down our way, speaking for Alexis and myself, we had a lot of ice. Like we had a lot of snow. Then we got a layer of ice, and then we got more snow on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
the
not
sandwich
fun.
effect was weird. Yeah, usually it's like ice is either all the way at the bottom or all the way on top. The fact that we got so much snow on top of it was unusual.
Then if you drove over top of that sandwich mix, it formed something
hard, like
a
rock.
plate of steel or rock that would not melt. And I finally took a steel bar out and chipped it away in 4-inch sections off of our driveway. We have a small driveway, and it took forever, and it's still laying in piles outside, and it's very slow to melt.
Yeah.
Very slow.
I mean, as of right now, plant-wise, I think everything is okay. I will say for any of those who, are plant lovers, but also may have some livestock on the side as well, chore time greatly increased by an extra at least 2 hours, to feed everything during that weather. So it was like better with, I guess, the snow, but now we're like in that lovely period.
Mud.
And Ray knows what I'm talking about, mud season.
Yeah.
So
when it's been frozen the longer it seems like it's been frozen, the more it's actually frozen to a depth, the worse it's going to be when it finally unthaws. And that's at a point in time when 4-wheel drive vehicles, tractors, trucks, whatever, don't mean a whole lot because they all sink to the axles and stop forward momentum. Yeah.
Right. It was harder. Like once all the snow and everything stopped for like getting the tractor around versus like when it was happening, like when you would think it would be like, oh, it must be really difficult to get out there and feed hay at that time. But it was like the couple days afterwards, that's when it was harder to get out and go down the driveway and, those things.
Yeah.
But we made it through, right? Because the sun is shining and it's actually like going to be like 50. And we're all going to get excited and want to plant.
And then the rain's going to come and more. It's going to be even muddier than it was before.
Right. I'm just trying to be like, it's filling the ponds up. That's a good thing, right?
Yes, totally.
Filling the ponds
Reserves.
Up. We're getting some deep, water penetration. The trees are going to be happy. Everybody's
That's right.
Yeah. It has been I feel like a really sunny winter so far. Like even though we've had a lot of precipitation, which is not super usual. And like the sun is what, I don't know, makes it better. Like I can work with the cold, but the gloom brings on the seasonal depression.
The
so
days
the sun
are
has
short.
been nice.
Yeah. And if they're gloomy and short, I feel like that, it's never ending. But the days are getting longer now.
They are getting longer.
For
20, 30 minutes a day.
When we have that much sun. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Alexis and I were talking about shoveling some snow into structures to just get a little bit of that moisture inside. I have the bonsai and other things in pots that they don't need a ton of water in the winter, but a little bit to kind of keep things moist. And I have them under cover and protected. And so as a result, they don't get that snow layer for insulation or anything else. So I've been throwing stuff in, but it was weird because it got so cold for a little while, like down into single digit 0, maybe even a little sub-zero around here. I don't know. It's just been a strange. I was really worried because with the ice about losing power, but around here a lot of the trees that are aging out and that are in trouble got knocked out by other aberrant weather events over the last 3 years and knocked out power for 4 days when it was nice outside. So luckily, when it was freezing cold, we didn't ever lose power, which was very lucky.
Yeah, we found out that -5 was the cutoff for our pipes. So -5, they freeze.
Okay.
Now we know.
Now we know.
Now we know.
I don't
the
want to
main
ask,
line
how do you know that? And it sounds
the
like
main line
you
does.
know that the hard way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, we got it on in the same day, but it was a little sketchy there for a while. But it was fun because it was just the one to the house, the ones to the barn, and the tunnels and stuff still had water. So I just like lugged water into the house. It's usually the opposite. You're lugging water to the barn, but so that was fortunate. But anyways, I think I've said "but" 4,000 times. It no longer has any meaning.
All of this winter activity and build up and anticipation, it's headed somewhere, right?
It's got to head somewhere. So
plants.
It always comes back to plants. It always does.
It's kind of like
eventually.
Winter chore time, planning, plants, all of that, getting ready for the farmers markets. That's what I've been doing in this cold winter weather because that's the time to do it. And I also don't want to be outside.
Are making excuses to actually do desk work.
Yeah. Filling out farmers market applications and like gathering all the info that goes with them, right? You're like Kentucky Proud stuff, maybe your microprocessing license, all of those fun things.
Like how much stuff there is. And I know some of you guys are growers personally, but we just had our annual meeting in the county that I'm in, and I forget that there's so much stuff. And I was like, well, what am I going to talk about this year? And I've got a little checklist. Jessica's helped me develop that over time. But I added to it, and I kept adding to it, and I kept adding to it. And I was like, dominated the meeting with just basic updates for new diseases or regulatory things you have to do or microprocessor things or all the things. There's a lot to get ready for in farmers markets here in Kentucky. So this is a great time to kind of get that started if you've not already got started on that. Lots of things going on, but
farmers market. So one thing that CCD does and works a lot with, Center for Crop Diversification, which is where Brett and I work, is we do a lot with farmers market. And so if any of you are interested in farmers market as it becoming, something you want to get into, whether or not it's the right market for you, just what are all the things that go along with it? We do have a lot of resources on our website. One of them we're going to talk about today that is can be particularly helpful when you're planning your summer and what cash flow might look like. And Brett, you've been doing this for like these price reports and
for well over 80 years.
Well over 80 years.
Or no. Like 10 years. Yeah. So I've been doing it since 2015. But the CCD has been collecting price reports from farmers markets and from produce auctions dating back to like 2004. If you aren't familiar, either you're from Kentucky or you're from somewhere else, maybe you aren't familiar. There was this thing that happened called the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement that essentially it was a legal action between a lot of parties in it, but the effect that it had on agriculture in large part was that it was going to mean that there was going to be less tobacco produced in the state of Kentucky, and that was a huge part of the profitability and the whole culture, everything of farms in Kentucky. And so as a result, there was either going to have to be something to theoretically replace or offset tobacco. There's people in agriculture who are going to try to figure out new alternatives. And so the organization that we work with, the Center for Crop Diversification, is actually celebrating its 25th anniversary, which the 25 years dates back to a couple years after we got our start a couple years after that the tobacco settlement. Yeah. And there's a lot of programs in Kentucky that's kind of start at that point. And so as we're looking back on these price reports, which were started in 2004, we're celebrating this 25th year. We have generated over the last few years these retrospective publications to kind of compare average prices over 3-year periods. As you know, 1 year might be crazy. There might be something about it. There's a drought or there's a hurricane that makes its way inland, hypothetically, or something else happens that affects things. So we try to use a 3-year average to just buffer some of those differences to see how things are changing across time. And so we have a new publication as of December, I guess, which is called the 3-year average weekly prices at Kentucky's farmers markets, 2022 to 2024 version. Not Taylor's version, but 2022 to 2024 version. And so we put these together because agents and producers have told us they're useful. It gives a sense of how things are changing and shifting and whether or not stuff at my market's been really expensive, or it feels like prices are coming down at my market. Is that true, elsewhere? It gives a little bit of a sense of the broader marketplace and some trends that are happening. And so we released that back in December. We've got a couple of short articles that kind of orient you to how you might use it, what you might think about it, but also I have some data here. So how do you all interact with farmers markets? Is this and the pricing thing, is this something it comes up in the offices?
Well, we used this report actually just last night at our excuse me, our farmers market meeting, and went over some of the basic trends, and got a lot of questions that I said, well, let me get back to you after we do this podcast episode and I get to talk to Brett a little bit more. But the information in this report's very well laid out, and I know that I saw market members pouring through the data, and that sparked a lot of conversation during our annual farmers market meeting. And I guess what they were seeing on paper kind of jived with what they saw happening in the real world. Number one, they recognize that there has been big swings in prices over the last few years, due to, I'm sure, a variety of factors, but they loved it. They found it very interesting. And I use a lot of Center for Crop Diversification publications with our farmers market. You guys have really great, just ongoing through kind of seasonal price reports. And then you have these historic price reports, but it sparked a lot of great conversation at the market among growers during that meeting. And I don't know, I guess we would be more of a rural market. Bourbon County and where our market's located in Paris, Kentucky is a small, it's not really a population center, smaller population. But one of the interesting things that they were looking at, our growers, is they really noticed that you guys broke down, and differentiated between urban and rural markets. And they just found that fascinating. They kind of always knew that sometimes you could fetch a higher price at the urban markets, but they loved seeing that data quantified on paper. They loved it. They really loved it.
It's the variability of the rural spaces and the prices there and in urban markets. It factors into a lot of different conversations. I mean, there's conversations about cost of living in rural and urban spaces and wages in those places, but there's also discussions of, is it worth it for me to drive an hour and a half to get to an urban area? Is it
That's
worth
the
it?
conversation. Yeah. We're
Yeah.
about 20 minutes from a more urban market. So that's why they found it so interesting. Some of our market members we're selling at our local rural market, but they also have access to fairly close by within 20 minutes, urban market. So they found it really interesting, Brett.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, once you show up to that urban market, you may be asked to pay a really high fee in order to set up there.
Yep.
And I mean, we're talking, there's urban markets that we have where the whole fee for the whole year might be $0. It might be $25. It might be, some of these rural markets, they're just trying to get vendors there. So they're not really in a position to charge. And then you have urban markets where it can be thousands of dollars to set up.
And
wait
waiting
list,
lists.
wait list, wait list to get in.
Politics, all the other fun things that are associated
Additional gate fees, percentages on what you make a month.
Yeah. What's your take on that stuff, Jessica?
Well, on the information you just shared, kind of like what Ray said, like for work wise, like I provide this information as a good starting point for people who are new to markets because they never know what to actually charge. And it's also good for those more experienced people as well, who are thinking about bumping up to maybe that urban market, or it kind of can be used sometimes for people who are like, oh, maybe I am charging a little too much for our area, and that's why I'm not moving products compared to, some other vendors. Personally, I find this information really fascinating and interesting because I've been doing markets for about 14 years now. My husband and I have. So it's really neat to see the change over time with the market prices. I've always, same thing as Ray mentioned, valued that urban versus rural, and being able to, provide that to growers to see how they should balance their prices, right? And just with the markets, like you said, if you go into these urban markets, a lot of our smaller markets have like a one-time fee at the beginning of the year. And so not as much of an input cost to it. So if you're not bringing home a ton, that might be okay. But then these larger markets have a lot more inputs into them to be involved. But you're hoping for a more trafficked market. You're able to ask for those higher prices that kind of go along with it.
Yeah. I could also see this being a useful tool for someone who maybe wants to expand what they grow. And so, looking at again, these are averages. You should always, in theory, we tell you that you should know your own numbers. But if you've never grown garlic before, but you can kind of say, all right, it'll be about this much to get the bulbs in, and let's just say it'll take me an hour to plant. You're kind of going through these things, but you don't know how much you're going to get for it. It can be nice to have these averages just to give you a place to start, and whether or not it's worth it to grow garlic or lettuce. And you might say, I'm not going to get a high enough price to warrant me purchasing this and my time to take to grow it. And I think that can be really, really helpful for people who are wanting to expand their production and what that might look like.
So I'm wanting to write a publication, maybe a couple, out of some of these data, because we now have 3-year averages going all the way back to 2016, and so just to put a little point on the conversation about the urban rural and that decision making, in this report, just taking a look at these averages in 2022, on average, urban prices were 35% higher than rural prices.
It's crazy.
That number in 2023 jumped to 39.6%, almost 40%. And then we saw in 2024, actually, the number came down a little bit back to 31%. But in any case, you're talking about almost a third higher prices. And in some cases, for some commodities or for some crops and products, that difference is greater, and some that's lower, obviously. But it is kind of it's expected, but when you see that type of number put on it, it's pretty staggering, honestly.
Yeah. There's some interesting sub trends there, and it kind of maybe you could help me out, Brett, kind of speaks to that. What you just, some of the statistics you just threw out there is that I was looking at one thing that you had published and kind of pushed out to us. And it was really interesting that on this latest price report, the average price increased 3.5% in urban markets, but the average price increased 5.3% in rural markets. So a larger increase in rural markets. What do you attribute that to? A price correction, or what's going on there? Is there any inferences you can make from that?
Yeah, hard to say. But the thing that you're pointing out there that I really like is that the gap between urban and rural was closing more as a factor of rural prices rural markets increasing their prices than it was about urban prices decreasing.
Yes.
So the city slickers didn't get their stuff any cheaper. The rural markets were starting to just charge a little bit more for their product. I think I would love to believe that some portion of that 5.3% is the result of people like us out there telling people to really think about how they're pricing their products.
Input cost, yeah.
Think about it. And sometimes maybe the realities of the spikes in input costs in 2022 and 2023 didn't really come home to roost until, this year.
Right.
It's hard. That one's hard to know. I think it also could be that there's maybe some more savvy business people coming into some of our rural markets who are pushing those prices up. But yeah, I think there's a number of different plausible hypotheses, plausible guesses as to why that might be. But it was good to see that it wasn't just that urban markets have crashed and that's why there's a smaller gap.
Yeah, no, it didn't seem to indicate that. Yeah, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think people are utilizing your resources.
Right. All of it's because of us.
Right.
And
it's in these smaller markets, it's like opening their eyes of what they could potentially ask, for their product, because they're growing a great product as well, just as they are, the urban markets. So
yeah, well, you bring up a good point about the ability to have conversations and the role that data that from a third party who really isn't involved can play in these groups. And it's something that I always encourage people. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this one particular example that I'll share here, but it's an opportunity to have a conversation that's informed. And I've found at times there are some people in the group who are really resistant to changing prices.
Yes.
There's some that are really adamant that we should be. And if you aren't familiar with farmers market dynamics, there's a lot of them who collectively discuss their prices, and they discuss, let's try to maintain the value of and the profitability of everyone by not selling stuff below cost or so cheap. And But there's a lot of anxiety too about raising prices too much. And I have this, example from one of our reporters who, she was talking about green onions. This is a number of years ago now, but she was talking about green onions, and she said that they had been selling green onions at their market for $1 a bunch since, I don't know what, the beginning. Or for at least several years, as long as she'd been around. And they wanted to think about raising their prices, but people were super, nervous about it. And so she goes to the reports. She kind of points out, look, everywhere in the state, even these markets that are kind of comparable to us, these these rural markets, everywhere is selling them for at least $2 a bunch. We are giving this product away. So having that data to point to instead of just vibes and just sort of arguing, I saw, my cousin said, allowed for them. And what they did that next week was they charged $2 a bunch, and everybody still sold out. And
right.
they made twice as much money on that.
Yeah.
Just that little change. And they probably could have charged more than that, but, and so those types of, and I've had similar conversations where you have either new people coming into the group, or there's just an ongoing schism that has different opinions about profitability and different, or some people are, if you have folks in the market who are more on the hobby side versus more on the professional side, whatever those distinctions mean, it can be difficult to have that conversation. And so I'm hopeful that these data do inform some good decision making.
Well, I really like and maybe we should just deliberately visit this, but at the beginning of this report, I like the way that you guys laid out, Brett, how to use this document. It's not a prescription, and you guys have sort of been talking about that this whole time on this episode, but it's really not a prescription of what you should charge. It sort of lays out the do's and don'ts of how to use the document, because what it boils down to is, you have to make a lot of individual considerations based on your situations, but it's real explicit about that and the trends that are contained in there. And, that points to the fact that, you do have to, no matter what, know your own input cost and, how far you are from markets or whatever, all the variables that, your market has. And they picked up on that last night because they started making comments. I heard someone yell across the room. It says, "Hey, that says how not to use this report." And they said, "That's not a to-do list." And one person yelled across the room, at one point, "There's a bulleted list." And they were like, no, you're using it wrong. And I was sort of cracking up. Yeah. And they were like, awesome. "Oh, yeah, we see how to use this report."
Oh, the how to use.
The how to use. But I was kind of laughing, but they did pick up on that. And hopefully, that does aid people when they use these documents, because I know that all this data that you guys put together and all the interpretations can be tricky. But
the reality is that these data that come from farmers markets is tricky to collect. It's tricky to pull together. It's tricky to analyze. Everybody, we preach diversification. I'm sorry, we do preach diversification, but we also preach differentiation of your product. Tell me the story of why this bean is special. And so at your farmer's market stand, you say, "This is my grandma Thelma's 12th generation heirloom bean that was brought here, from Ireland," and blah, 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 all these things. And that's why it's an extra 50 cents per pound. And I'm on the marketing side, I'm like, yes, please do that. If your customer cares about that, amazing work. But when it comes to farmers market price reporting, we have 35 characters to describe what an item is, what size it is, et cetera. And we're trying to compare to some extent like to like. So that's one thing that's kind of wild, is if you have something that's specialty or different or unique, that it's hard for us to really bring that in, especially if you're charging a premium, because we really want to compare green beans to green beans to green beans, regardless of the market. And so and everybody's special, and that's amazing. But that's one thing. And then the other is just units. Units is
pounds and bunches.
Yeah.
Handful. I'm like, whose handful? Is this my handful? Is this a small child's handful? How tight are you gripping the
quantify that? Yeah.
Are they weighing them? Are they putting them in quart containers? Are they putting them in plastic bags already? Yeah, it's all over.
That's
one
of the
place.
reasons cut flowers are not on the list currently, because they're
too special.
Well, they're special for sure, like variety wise, but the
specialized maybe.
Just like, a bouquet is not a bouquet is not a bouquet. So
that isn't. I had just having a conversation. We Alexis and I were out at the Organic Association of Kentucky conference. Shout out to the Oak team.
What up?
Amazing event. And a person came up to me and was asking about does our reports include flowers? And I was like, well, yes, but
no.
And like, so it's like, the idea of a bouquet. That's how a lot of people are marketing them. That might be just sort of a, what do they call it, Alexis? When it's just like a random,
a mixed bouquet.
What is it?
A mixed bouquet?
Mixed. I feel like a
market bouquet.
Sarah Gerkink used some term that was like, it's, I don't know. I have to get back with her and follow up, but yeah, it's just like you have like zinnias and some other, I don't know, other mixed kind of summer flowers. You just cut them, go, and it's a bouquet. It's very different from specialty Lysianthus and specialty this and specialty that. That wouldn't be out of place at like a New York high concept event. They're different things, and so it's hard to compare those. The idea of you mentioned the unit pricing, like the weight by weight. So what we end up doing is we end up making some assumptions, and this is all included in there with links out to the publications we use for reference, that like a certain number of pounds of tomatoes is this many quarts. And so, or vice versa, as far as and this many bushels of green beans has on average this many pounds in it, or quarter bushels or whatever. So we do have to do some conversion and some stuff. And so that's why that, in addition to just the basic marketing and business principles for why you wouldn't want to use this as a prescription, is why we do that. And so, for example, or the way that I talk about it, I guess, is that these reports can help you see what the going rate for a product is in some markets similar to yours. That's all it tells you. That does not mean that those products are being sold at a profit. It doesn't mean that those people are growing in the same system as you, have the same costs as you, have the same quality as you. There's no quality component here.
Or like organic versus not.
Yep, correct. I mean, we do sometimes report those if available in our weekly reports, but that's not factored in here in these year-end reports, just because we don't have enough reporting organic markets to factor that in. But this is one part of it. How much is stuff going for? And then the other part is, how much does it cost for me to sell it, and how much profit do I want to make, and do those two things line up? And so if you do your math and you see that you can't possibly sell tomatoes at a farmer's market for less than $5 a pound, then that means maybe you shouldn't be growing tomatoes to grow and sell at a market. And that's an okay decision to make, because maybe you're really good at growing cucumbers, or you're really good at doing value-added stuff, and you actually want to go that direction, or cut flowers, or whatever. So,
that's a great number, though. I mean, not to discount the number. I love the numbers. It is more of an indication to me of like the public's price sensitivity to things in a given market. If you really look into it, you guys are very deliberate to say, hey, know your own situation, know your role, know your expenses. But I love the fact that, that's a great number still. And you guys have done a good job of leveling that as much as you can, because I realize, and Jessica, you mentioned, is it a bunch? Is it a pound? Bray, you said, how big's a handful? And I know that drives you guys that love spreadsheets crazy, because you're going to have a million columns, Brett. You just add more columns, man. Add more columns. I know it's super tough, but it's still great. It's supremely useful information. Not only the historic stuff that I mentioned earlier, like the during the season numbers about what's going on immediately. And those are awesome too.
Yeah, that's really cool when you think about, so like tomatoes are the most popular high tunnel crop in the state, right? So, but looking at that, like, is it worth it to put your tomatoes in extra early and maybe rip out another crop because you're going to get a high enough price point?
Right.
Versus the field tomatoes in, and then you can look at, okay, well, it cost me a lot less to do field tomatoes. So really I make more per pound, even though I'm technically not, charging less per pound. Like being able to look at that and make this like production system decisions,
Yeah.
or having
Watching the
data to support
crash.
those decisions is like super, super helpful. And like the opportunity cost of going to a farmer's market, right? So if you just said, and we kind of said this, but I like to call it opportunity cost because I learned that term a long time ago and I've kept on it. But, if you are deciding between a roadside stand and going to a farmer's market, you might make less at the roadside stand, but you're not putting in as much effort, right? That is going to the market. And so seeing those general numbers can be so, so helpful. And I think sometimes we forget to use it in that way. And we're just looking at, am I charging enough for my tomato? Well, I don't know.
And timing, and it's so interesting watching a new producer interpret these for the first time or see it graphed out month-wise, on one of the axes. And then they're like, well, why is there always such a big dip? And then they start to think about it and they're like, oh, that's when everybody has tomatoes and the price just bottoms out. And that leads to a whole nother set of interesting, things and questions and conversations. And it just goes to show that. And especially this historical data, if you're looking at, monthly, like what prices things bring, it's a really interesting. And I've even had a market person said, oh, I guess we're losing money on that. What we lose per unit, we'll make it for in volume, and just laughed because it was a numbers person. And that's the classic joke. I was cracking up because they saw that at a certain point they were going to put, grow field tomatoes, but they were going to be coming off based on the days to maturity of that particular variety, that it was going to come off right at the bottom of the price curve. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of great, little side conversations you can have from the data, historical and current.
Yeah,
the good stuff.
Y'all are really, really gassing us up here. I appreciate that. But
I love the numbers.
One thing too is that in general, we sometimes approach, and this is because there's a lot of beginners involved, we sometimes approach direct marketers, farmers marketers, etc., like at a very basic level, as if like the content and the information should be very basic and very straightforward. And I appreciate that. I appreciate good basic information regardless of the context. But the reality is these direct marketing channels are pretty complex. And they're really complex in small spaces. What I mean by that is there's some other, agricultural markets and other phenomena in general that are complex mainly just because they're so big and there's so many actors involved. But there's a lot involved. And so that all that heady talk for me to say, Alexis, when you're talking about looking at early tomatoes, there are some data to suggest that one of the more important things for farmers market vendors is to establish your customers early in the season, because if someone comes to you, they know where your booth is, they feel comfortable with who you are, they're more likely to buy from you across the whole season.
I would agree with that. I've seen that.
We're creatures of habit, and like safety is important. And at a very like primal level, it may manifest as like, oh, that nice person sold me that stuff, and I liked that. But on a primal level, it's almost more like I got my food stuff from that person. It was safe. It was
it was
cool,
good.
so I will keep going.
The power of routines, yeah.
You see these really weird dynamics in the prices, and if you go and find the report, you can see the individual crop price dynamics, and they are throughout the course of the year. So what was it in May versus June versus August for things things that were in season then, and it's not at all what you would expect. And a lot of times it's like relatively flat, or like meaning that most people are charging around the same price for the whole season. In some cases, there will be a decline when stuff comes into season, but other times it'll completely go against your expectations. This is kind of to what Ray was talking about. If you compare that to like our auction reports and our auction analysis, it follows. With auctions, we're able to better track volumes. And it's literally as volume, the amount of product that's available goes up, i.e. it comes more and more into season, the price goes down. And then as the amount available goes down, the price goes right back up. And it's this, two upside down or two opposite types of curves that you can see. And we just don't see that in farmers markets because they're complicated in this weird way, because they're relational. It's a retail space, but it's also seasonal. And so the amount of the volume that's available doesn't necessarily translate in a lot of consumers' minds. The types of people who are messaging you in April and saying, "Oh, you're going to have tomatoes at market this weekend." Well,
Brett,
no.
do you guys see any differences? I mean, maybe the information is not nuanced enough to speak to this, but speaking of price variability, did you see much of any kinds of trends between urban and rural markets? I've always been really interested in that, where urban markets seem to have a little bit different kind of swagger about them, different population levels, so on and so forth. I mean, I've always wondered, are they more buffered against some of these swings? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yes, I
Are
think
they?
so. And I think another thing that we have seen across these reports has been that availability of product tends to be more continuous at urban markets compared to rural markets, because there are some places where people only want to buy stuff until it comes in their garden.
Right.
And then
Yeah, we see that a lot with
Rural
having
markets, yeah, I could see that very easily.
because everybody has a garden, right? And so like in our county we see a definite change in that, because then they're just kind of supplementing some of the stuff if they don't have enough. Something like kind of on topic with this, but would be interesting how you mentioned how with farmers market there's more of that relationship with vendors, and about how you said like, oh, I bought something from this person from the beginning, so now I'm always going to shop with that person. That would be very interesting to track that, or to see why people go to certain vendors. And you do build relationships with people, and some of them, you know their names. Some of them, I will own up to this. There's a man, an older gentleman. He has a corgi. The corgi's name is Dougal. Dougal barks a
Not
lot at the
mine.
market. I know Dougal's name. I do not know the gentleman's name, but he is wonderful and he always buys tomatoes from us, right? But we are his tomato place when there are 5 or 6 other vendors who also sell great tomatoes or who've had them way before we've had them. So that's kind of interesting, that to think about those relationships and how they might impact your trends as well for like selling wise.
totally, yeah. And it brings an emphasis to some of the other marketing, education, and support that we do to try to help with that. I mean, granted, theoretically, if everyone followed our advice, they would kind of create an equal playing field, but it doesn't really do that. Some people listen, some people don't. But things like having an attractive display that looks clean and is just attractive and inviting, and you yourself being friendly enough to say hello, to have clear signage, to have all those little things, it actually has this effect. Yes, you're sort of converting that first sale, but converting that first sale in these relationship based marketing contexts can have all of these domino effects throughout the course of the season, even one season to another. And you've seen that with Dougal Senior and Dougal Junior.
I always look forward to seeing Dougal and owner
and seeing and hearing, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what, like, have you all observed any, this covers 2022 to 2024, but maybe if we think a little bit longer back to the COVID times, this last 5-year chunk of time, do you all have any kind of impressions or thoughts about farmers markets, where they're headed, what people are saying? Are you having more, new people get involved as vendors, or what about customer bases? Any kind of tales from the field would be really, I'd be intrigued to
I
hear.
think during COVID, you saw an increase on both ends, right? You saw where people were like, I'm going to grow my own stuff, right? For my family. And then if I'm going to grow enough, I'm going to sell it. So I know I saw an increase of people wanting to join markets, but then also being a vendor ourselves, it was just, they were slammed, right? The markets were slammed with people coming and buying, because there was that worry about, I'm not going to find stuff in the actual grocery stores, right? And then kind of after COVID, that leveled off, but I don't think like it dropped, right? Like I think the markets gained new
I
customers.
think they established some habits, and I
Yeah.
love it. Some buying
Now,
habits.
as far as vendors, I think a lot of people got really excited and wanting to do it, and then they realized,
farming is hard.
Farming's hard. And so maybe they've tailored off a little, but I think they're like, it wasn't a significant drop, right? There's still always new people interested in joining markets and doing that. And I think it helps, like if they've had a successful home garden, or if they're like already a mid-range grower, like wanting to bump up. But definitely like during COVID, at least I saw an increase from both sides of it, like increased customer foot traffic and people wanting to be a part of a market and start selling.
Yeah, I think people were expecting that there'd be this spike in demand, and as soon as things went back to normal, the grocery stores shelves were restocked. It would just be a instant return to normalcy, and whatever that meant, or the absurd state we were in before. I don't know. Maybe it's not normal. None of it. There is no normal. But that the economists have a very evocative term to say that the demand for local products was stickier than expected. That it's more resistant to change, and sort of, it's like a Klingon. It's clinging on.
I think tasty, fresh fruits and vegetables are habit forming. That's my philosophy. That's my theory. It's a habit forming.
In the midst of a crazy, isolating period of time where you have time, some degree, what depends on who you are and what you were doing, but you at least had some forced time alone and probably time to reflect on relationships. We know, and there's some really cool, interesting data from Tim Woods that we work with about some of how important community is to people who shop at farmers markets, which is
exactly
but to have data
say.
is. Oh, sorry, Alexis.
No, I'm glad I didn't know that Tim had some data. So that's good for me to know as a newbie to CCD. But being an agent, during COVID and like 4 years after it, we really saw we would have a rural market and it grew a lot, but a lot of that had to do with the community of just having something to do on a Saturday. And so, everyone would come, everyone would buy something, but they were there for the chatter and the, maybe the music playing, the socialization of it. So that socialization is what keeps them coming back. And they're like, well, while I'm here, I might as well get some stuff, So it was sort of and that's what we've seen continue, is those relationships made during a time when, people were maybe feeling more lonely than usual, maintained. And so it was kind of like a standard. I see so-and-so on Saturday at the farmer's market. And we really saw that increase. And then I think also, going back to what Jessica was saying about a lot of people grew gardens, right? So maybe they were vendors, or maybe they aren't any, and they aren't anymore. But I think the value of what farmers do, the perception of that for probably increase, I would assume. Again, I'm not going off data here, but the people who tried to grow a garden and maybe they're not getting as many tomatoes as they thought they should, they see the value in paying maybe that $5 a pound for a tomato because they know how hard it is. So I think that there was some added value to the work done by farmers.
It was another interesting thing I observed at our market that was already happening pre-COVID. I mean, there's pre-COVID and post-COVID as far as, the scope of this discussion, but it was interesting. And I wonder if that's not one of the things that helped people develop a habit, in that friction was removed in purchasing at the farmer's market. And by that, I mean, I think that the evolution of small and medium-sized vendors sort of sped up, and they did things like they accepted alternate form of payments, or they accepted all the swap payments. And it's amazing how many people said that that's why they shop at the market, because then they realize that people can swap. And I saw things like that accelerate through COVID and post-COVID, during COVID and then after COVID, is that the payment methods removed a lot of friction to purchase. Not only that, but our market greatly evolved in things like CSA baskets. Our market acts as an accumulation point where they're a purchasing point, the market itself, and then they assimilate, baskets and then have different share levels. There's more microprocessors now. There's more home-based processors. All of that, I think, sped up in evolution, but the biggest factor there was just simply something small like a payment swap method that made it so much more easier.
Man, you all are so smart and you're so engaged and plugged in. It's so awesome. It's just like so awesome because so back when, we're coming up on the time of year where I'm reminded in 2020 when everything started to be like, oh no, things are going to be different for now. And that March, April, May time period where luckily we had been preaching take other forms of payment because people are I refer to it as the inverse Dave Ramsey, that Dave Ramsey wants you to not use your card
right
because you're going to spend too much money. Please use your card so that you can spend too much money. You can't say, I only have $40, so I can't. No, my friend. Swipe
we
away.
take a card. Yeah.
We take a card. Come on.
That's a big deal for ad markets. I mean,
invest in
people
your health.
constantly, and it's amazing how many people come currently and they hadn't been to a market in a long, long time. And they say, wow, we're really amazed that everybody can swap now.
Mm-hmm.
And
now
they're
Venmo's like a big thing.
Yeah.
People don't even bring a card anymore. They just want to like pay you on Venmo or
the systems
Cash
have
App
gotten
or something.
better.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's wild. Yep.
Yeah, all the technology, the support technology that market vendors can then employ, and use to get their products into people's hands more easily. It's
not
all
even
awesome. It's all
thinking
awesome.
about like all the WIC and senior programs as
Double
well.
dollars and all of those programs.
Those are all swipeable now too. Like they have like cards for those, and like you said, double dollars program, and streamlining those things to make them easier for both market vendors and the clientele to use them.
Just making it so much more easy to come and purchase things
to buy
and
things.
Be convenient. Yeah. Do you guys take all the alternate methods or like Venmo or PayPal, Jessica, when you guys are selling Alexis?
Definitely we do. We have like Square credit card wise. And then you would still be amazed how many people they're just trained though, like to this, who bring cash, like
oh sure,
to markets still, but definitely the credit card is game changing for a producer.
We do Venmo, especially because we have a self-service stand.
Oh, awesome!
But also just I think with flowers where they're they're not a necessity item for most people. And so Venmo tends to kind of be more on like fun money, I guess is a good way. That's the way Tyler and my husband and I describe it, is like fun money tends to be in more Venmo accounts. And so people are like able to spend it easier, I guess is a way to think about it. From that,
making your data more complicated, Brett. We're mentioning all these secondary factors.
Well, and that if there could be people who raised their prices marginally in order to cover some of those credit card fees. People are so averse to the credit card fees, and I get it. I do get it, but like the whole simple math of if you sell 20% more as a result of taking credit cards, factor that into the fee. Like it's just the cost of doing business in the same way that if you had to drive more, or you have anyway, that's getting on me getting on my soapbox. But I still, there are still people who I sat with on the phone in March and April in 2020 who set up like pre-order systems. And they set up their ability to take cards. They set up their all of these things so that they could still function, in a contact-free world, that still use those technologies because they saw like, oh wow, this is way easier when I can like know how much I need to take. I can have this
people got used to it, so they were like, they want
amazing.
That.
And so, in the same way that it got a lot of people used to this digital meeting space and digital presentation space, for better or for worse. I don't know, a lot of webinars. But it did hit fast forward on that technology adoption rate. So
to brag on Brett, I attended some of those like trainings for our market here in Mercer County of like doing these pre-order systems and using you know, I mean, we were using like Google Forms and stuff before, but we weren't like really using them like we, you know, did once like COVID and stuff happened. So like excellent training opportunities from Brett.
Well, thanks.
It's ahead of the curve.
We're hoping
he
to.
Was.
Well, we had been my colleague Christy at the time and I had been doing webinars for 5 years at that point, and that was before Zoom. It was before we used Adobe Connect. I'm sounding like the old, whatever, but I've been lucky to work with. I've been lucky to work with people who, like to, including Alexis, including Ray, including Jessica, who like to think about things a little differently and prioritize what people really want and deliver it in a way that's useful and works for them. And that's the whole reason that I go through the very fun ordeal of creating these three-year average price reports, is because I do think that they're useful. I think it's a helpful conversation starter. And I'm in the same way that I think farmers market people are just excited to like have a document that is just all about their experience of thinking about prices. It's like a weird, it's like going to the Comic-Con or whatever for whatever your interest is. And everyone there is like, whoa, we're all into this. I think that they have that experience. And I have that experience today of like, yeah, this is all stuff that we have talked about and thought about. And so it's nice to share.
Cool. So if you're interested in price reports, even if you don't live in the state of Kentucky, you may be able to check stuff out and see sort of how that works, whether that's auction or farmers market.
Yeah, we have reports for Tennessee that our colleague Margarita Valandia down there collects, that we post on the site as well.
Absolutely. So there you go. Cool. You can get 2 states. And if you're in the Southeast, even, you may be able to kind of use those to check that out. But you can find those on our CCD website, which is just ccd.uky.edu. And so we can throw that in the show notes if you're interested in checking out any of the resources that we have on there for direct markets or wholesale markets, or we got a lot. So definitely check out the website. It's new, so we're pretty proud of it. And let us know if you've got any questions, if you want to deep dive more into wholesale marketing and the different avenues of wholesale for, institutions and farm to school. We've not really done that, but that could be of interest to some of you out there. So feel free to drop that down in the review section as you give us 5 stars. Say, this was great, would love to know about XYZ. You can also send us an email. Our email is in the show notes if you want, and we all get access to that email so we can all check that out. Also, you can find us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast, and you can drop us a line in there if you have interest, and it'll just kind of keep you up to date that a new episode has dropped, or some cool stuff that we have found. We share a lot of stuff from our other organizations, such as Oak, who we mentioned earlier, but things that are timely and might be useful, in between your, of course, programmed weekly episodes. So if you've got anything for us, definitely let us know. But we appreciate you guys being here today with us, and we hope that we will chat with you next time. Have a great one.